Welcome to the Disrupting Obesity podcast. I'm Charlotte Skanes, and I'll be sharing ways to regain control over your body and lose an extreme amount of weight naturally. Being fat is about so much more than just the food. It's about your relationship with food. That means that dealing with your weight is about more than just the food, too. You have to change that relationship. You have to start disrupting obesity. I seem to have a recurring theme lately. I haven't really been doing my usual type of content aside from the Ask Whatever episodes that I've been doing, and I want to take a minute and explain it to you. I'm so grateful to all of my flamingos. You guys are all over the world and you are so supportive. I've been opening up more and more, and I'm so often surprised by the parts of my story that you connect with, and I'm trying to censor myself a little bit less. Two main things are going on just generally with me right now, and specifically with the podcast. I think one, I'm converting my entire one-on-one coaching program into an online experience. The program is 53 weeks long. It's absolutely massive, and we are not here to talk about it today, but there's loads more info in episode number 51, and there are links to everything in the notes. So I've been insanely busy with that whole process, and to pull it off, I've had to put doing some other things on hold. By the time this episode airs, I will be almost completely finished. And I can't wait for you guys to see what's coming next because I've got so much in the works for the back half of this year. So there's all of that. And the second thing that's going on is the one way I've found to create time so that I can get everything completely finished has been doing all of the catch up, ask whatevers that we've been doing. I would love to be one of those podcasters who can just sit down at the mic and talk for an hour and it's cohesive, but I can't do that. My brain doesn't work that way. In the real world, I can completely forget my point like a quarter of the way into whatever I'm talking about. And in a pressurized situation, like trying to come up with a cohesive podcast episode, I don't tend to do very well. I tried at the very beginning, but yeah, no, it wasn't a good idea. So I write these, and I don't know if that's a taboo thing in podcasting or not. I'm realizing as I'm writing this that maybe this isn't something I should be admitting to, but I'm not going to be ashamed of things that are outside of my control. I mean, I could. I kind of want to. Like, I would love to pretend that I could just do this, but that's not the case. And this isn't the first time that I've talked about these production processes either, right? I have to have these episodes done and off to my absolutely amazing team 2 weeks before they go out to you. So at any point, I can be working on 4+ different episodes at once. The Ask Whatevers are a lot of fun, though, to write, and they're slightly faster than the episodes that mostly cover a single topic. So to buy myself more time for the program migration and to deal with a very serious backlog of questions, and there's still a few hundred to get to, but I've doubled down, right? We've doubled down on them. The trend lately on the non Ask Whatever episodes has been to try and write things that really scare me. Not as a challenge to myself necessarily, but just because that's what keeps coming up. And sometimes I have to get stuff out of my head to make room for other things. As I'm writing this, the first of the episodes that I didn't know if I could write them or record them just aired. That was Hope, number 57. And I've got 2 other episodes that I'm working on right now that also scare me completely shitless. They're just going to air in the order that I can get them written, if I can get them written and recorded. And I haven't told these stories or shared these experiences because they're insanely personal. And because I kind of just feel like, why would anybody care? Right? I also hate whining, and I'm not comfortable bragging either. So I share these stories when I feel like they're necessary to share something weight loss related. Right? But I usually know going into it what the connection is. Like, it makes sense to talk about what it was like when I wasn't allowed to eat anything at all, when I was also going through the hardest period of my life, and how messed up that is given the way that I've always used food to comfort myself and cope with life when times get hard. That's a pretty straight line from A to B. But with this story today, the one that I want to tell you, I don't know what the connection is yet. Something happened that changed my life. It undoubtedly saved my life, but I'm not sure yet how that pertains to you. Because ultimately, I don't want this podcast to be about me. I'm here to serve you. What I have to do is figure out the line between oversharing and giving you the pieces of my story that can help you to move forward. That's the balance that I'm trying to strike. This one though, and it's such a small thing that I feel like you might hear it and go, yeah, and um but it's the lack of connection that I'm struggling with though. And I know I just have to start telling you and it'll come together somehow, but this one is so personal that I need to make sure that I can find a way to make that connection, or I don't know how I'm going to be able to get through it. So it feels like forever ago. But way back in episode 15, I talked about my physio journey. And I've shared bits and pieces of it in several other episodes since. But there are a lot of stories that I haven't told. And since I seem to be doing this whole series of episodes where my heart is in my throat while I write them, and I really don't know if I'm going to be able to do it or not, we might as well take a run at this one too. Everything happened so fast. 1 minute I was 7 months pregnant, the next I was dying. In some ways, there's a bit of a parallel between when I was fat. I'd known I was in trouble for a while, but I had no clue how big I'd gotten. My body dysmorphia ran both ways, and it had always been an issue for me. Like, I felt like I'd been hit in the face with a wet fish when I got on the scale on my 24th birthday at the annual physical that I'd scheduled for myself. And I weighed over 300 pounds. I knew I was big, but I didn't know I was that big because I'd been pretty deep in denial about my weight for a long time. Like, I'd spent years unhappy with my body and my size. And then I just started getting bigger and bigger. I spent the first years of my 20s gaining more than 30 pounds a year. My mid 20s, I spent losing 200 pounds, and then I kept it off for like 9.5 years. So I'd made it, right? I'd made it past the 5 year hurdle. That's actually more of a brick wall, given that only about 15% of people who lose their weight are able to keep it off past the 5 year mark. I didn't feel cocky about it or anything. It wasn't like that. That's not how I gained my weight back. I gained it back because we lost 3 pregnancies, and I decided that food was coming back in my life in all of my favorite excessive ways because the grief and the pain were so big that I really didn't care if I put on a few pounds. I go into my regain and our pregnancy loss in episode 24. Gaining's part of losing. I'm not going to go into it today though. But I was super cocky even before I regained about 115 pounds that I could take it back off again. And I'm still pretty cocky about it because I did. And it's been off for 6 years now. I'm cocky that I'm going to keep it off because I absolutely have to. My health is too precarious to try and manage it with any extra weight on my frame. Well, I mean, that could tax my system, my organs. So, it's also fear, good, healthy fear. In between gaining it back and losing it for the second time, that whole almost dying thing happened. And it changed everything. I still am who I was, but now I'm something else too. I know many of you have heard some of this before, so I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm just going to cut right to the chase and sum things up real quick for anybody new. I became catastrophically ill at 32 weeks pregnant with our third son. I felt so fortunate to be pregnant with each of our 3 sons after having lost 3 pregnancies that my gratitude somehow made relatively difficult pregnancies seem bearable. I had morning sickness that lasted all day for the whole pregnancy, all 3 pregnancies, preeclampsia with our first, polyhydramnios with our second, and eventually I had pancreatitis with our third. What I'm saying though is that right up until the morning that I got sick, I was still going. Like, I cooked dinner and did laundry the night before. I didn't feel great, but I never felt great when I was pregnant. I had no clue what was coming. I didn't understand what happened to me as it was happening. Sean spent months after I got home letting me talk my way through it, filling in gaps and just explaining things to me. I don't know how to explain what it feels like when things are happening to you, but you don't understand what's going on. I obviously knew I was sick. I was in a hospital. That's kind of hard to miss. I knew I'd had a C-section. I don't remember the actual surgery, but I remember the minutes leading up to it, and I could remember them too. I could still remember it then. I did not want to have a C-section. I didn't want one because I was only 32 weeks pregnant and I was terrified of my son being born 8 weeks premature. I didn't want one because I didn't want one. I'd had my other two sons vaginally, and at that point, but not for very much longer at all, I thought I was going to have more children. So I fought it like hell. I was so sick I could barely move. The pain was excruciating. I can remember being asked before the life flight if I was in labor, and I'd said no. They could see contractions on their monitors, but I couldn't feel them because the rest of the pain in my abdomen was just way louder. I remember the race down the hall at my local hospital on the way to the helicopter, and I remember being loaded onto the life flight, but I don't remember being unloaded or moved into the room in the city hospital. I just remember the noise and all these people in the room. It felt like I was just surrounded by this massive crowd of people, and I was arguing with them and screaming and refusing and begging not to have the C-section. Thank God they got Sean to override me. And then we were racing up another hall, this time on the way to an OR. I was laying in the middle of the room and everybody was just rushing and rushing all around me. I had a moment of almost calm where I wondered who was screaming, and I realized it was me. And I thought to myself, that only happened in books or on the TV. And then I saw the face of the anesthesiologist, and then nothing. Things only got more confusing for me after that. So I've talked about Nick before, but I've never told this story. And I really doubt he would ever hear this, but I hope if he does, he'll understand why I'm sharing it. I also seriously doubt that he would even remember this. It's not that I think he would have forgotten me. We were together for very intense months. I think just by virtue of how long I was there, he would remember me, but we also went through a lot together. If you think a physiotherapist can't save someone's life, buckle up, because I'm about to show you that they absolutely can. This one did, and that's part of why I'm not sure he'll remember the story I'm about to tell you, because he's extraordinary. He's a hero, and saving people is just what he does. You have to understand that I was like an animal. I was feral. They had knocked me out literally mid-scream and ripped my baby out of me. I had tubes running out of both sides. I had PICC lines running in both arms. I had a central line in my neck. I wasn't allowed to eat or drink anything. And trying to even so much as roll over in bed or sit up was agonizing. I'm not exaggerating. It was scream out loud levels of pain, and I was on a morphine drip. I was scared all the time, and my reactions were utterly primal. I was trying to cooperate. I was trying to be a good patient and remember my manners. I was trying not to be snippy or rude. But my babies were gone, and I was too sick to see them. They were too young to understand. My oldest turned 3, 5 days before I got sick. My middle boy was 15 months old. I was full of tubes and I couldn't move. There are very few pictures of this time, so you'll have to believe me when I say that I looked like a monster. And I felt like a monster because I didn't want them to see me like that. I didn't want to scare them. And there were people who didn't understand that, who were judging me quite harshly for not wanting the boys to see me. And I felt that judgment, and I already felt so judged. No one was saying anything about my weight, but I felt it. And I do have memories of my weight coming up a couple of times. But those memories are mixed in with other memories that I know aren't real. Well, they're real in the sense that I remember them, and I remember believing that those things were happening at the time. But I also know for a fact that they're hallucinations, that I was just completely delirious. So I don't really know if the memories of, the one nurse saying really nasty things about my size and the techs laughing over whether or not I could fit into the CAT scan, I don't know if they're real. I know that the way I reacted was because I believed then that those things were happening, and I felt humiliated. and so judged. And I don't handle that well. I don't care for it at all. I wasn't raised to not care what other people think. It mattered. Sometimes it still does. But I wasn't imagining that there were people judging me who didn't understand why I didn't want Sean to haul our 3-year-old and 15-month-old to a massive hospital in a massive city that they'd never been to so that they could see their nearly unrecognizable, barely conscious mother and watch her silently fight for her life. What could I say to them? We were playing a game of choose your trauma, and there were no wins. Well, this is for Sean, not for me, because I'm not being disingenuous. I had no clue that I was dying. I didn't understand even that much of what was going on. I wasn't lying there trying to compose my last words to the people I loved most or writing letters for the boys to open on their 18th birthdays. It didn't even occur to me. I didn't know. So I wasn't conscious of the boys needing to come in so they could say goodbye to me. I'm sure it was something that Sean was constantly having to wrestle with, but I was totally unaware of any need to give them closure or a desire to have them remember me the way I was before I got sick, which is a joke anyway. There would have been no memories of me. I was trying to protect them from seeing me like that. The do-gooders, or whatever they were, they thought I was doing it because I didn't care, that it was indicative of my larger failings as a mother. And that made me so angry and it hurt me so badly. So I didn't know if I was being strong enough to keep them away or if it was a selfish thing that made me a bad person. Like they seemed to somehow think that it did. I didn't know if it was the right or wrong thing that I was doing. I only knew that it was the only thing I could do. I was retreating. The things my body was going through aren't things that it's easy to be overly present for. And the pain, the constant thirst, the confusion, and that's painful too. You hear me. You're here for a reason from 100 countries all over the world. And I'm pretty sure it's fairly clear that I'm not a complete idiot. So imagine thinking the way that I do, but being missing all the pieces and just having zero understanding of what was going on, like on even the most basic level. I didn't understand why I couldn't move or why I was on oxygen all the time or my skin was turning to scales. I'm not sure they ever even figured that one out. I think it might have been a reaction to a medication I had or something, but no, seriously, scales, like a lizard. My body turned, yeah. I didn't know if it was night or day. I had no clue how long I'd been in the hospital or how long they thought I was going to be there. I didn't even know what was wrong with me or what its name was. I didn't know my own diagnoses, any of them. And at the time in question, the moment that I'm trying to share, and I've been blithering now for I don't even know how long at this point, but I'm trying to show you what it was like. And I feel like as confusing as this is, maybe that helps because it's confusing. But this thing that happened, I think I'd been in the hospital for a few weeks. I was moved around a lot. I'd get a little bit better and they'd try to free up an ICU bed. And rightly so. Nobody did anything wrong with my care. It's a miracle that I'm here. These people moved mountains, and I'm not accusing anyone of any wrongdoings or errors, and I won't hear any criticism either. Please, I'm begging you, don't send the email that has the words, they should have done this. I won't hear it. These people saved my life, and they worked harder than I've ever seen people work to do it. So when I say they tried to free up an ICU bed, they did it so they could save another life, the same way that they'd saved mine. They would only transfer me out if I was stable and they thought I was going to make it. The problem is just how quickly I would stop being stable and how frequently that happened. The nurses they'd be so happy for me when I'd be transferred out because I'd be that one step closer to home, right? And it sucked for them when I got transferred back because at that point, for the first 5 weeks, there were 2 of us that they were working to keep alive. Our son was in the NICU too. Toronto's a big city. But even big city hospitals only have so many beds and so many ICU nurses. And this was pre-COVID, right? Things were different then. At one point in the first few days, they actually had me in maternity. And I was well enough to go to the step down unit at least 3 times before I didn't end up moving back into the ICU. And I finally started the long journey to not being sick. So I was transferred a lot. And I hope I've painted enough of a picture so that you can understand the chaos and confusion that I felt. This happened in the step down unit, a few weeks and many, many unit transfers in. And I was very confused. I'd already had so many procedures, which I'm sorry, I really don't want to sound like a whiner, but some of them are just surgeries without a lot of cutting. And I get that cutting is probably a fundamental requirement for something to qualify as surgery. But I was cut a lot and it wasn't ever called surgery. And I get it. Not whining. I'm just trying to differentiate because I say I had a lot of procedures and it really doesn't sound like much of anything. Like, oh, maybe you got a mole removed. You had a procedure. What I mean when I say procedure is being like taken into a room by myself and having a local applied to my side and then having a doctor take a scalpel and cut my side open so that he could jam a tube in there that will act as a drain. And I know that saved my life. Happened a few times. And it's not, being sliced from stem to stern to have your liver repaired or open heart surgery. But it was not having a mole removed either. The meds that are supposed to make it so that you don't remember didn't work with me. I do remember. And by the time this event happened with Nick, I had a lot to remember already. More than 4.5 liters of infection were taken out in the first life-saving procedure. No cutting, just tubes down my throat while me, big fat me, was strapped sideways to a wall and they sucked it out through my mouth that way, through the tubes. Imagine not knowing why any of that was happening, just knowing that you were going through it all. I was so confused that my memories of this event are all set at night. Every time I've started to write a sentence, I keep saying that night. My physio team didn't work nights. Nick was there from the beginning. He was in all the rooms that I was in, but it was never at night. Not a single time. I know that. And yet I still can't change the way that I remember it. And please know that even though that part of my memory is wrong, it's incorrect, that doesn't make the rest of it wrong too. I can see that night like a made-for-TV movie. I can see it like I watched it happen, but it wasn't like that at the time. I was entirely consumed by what my body was going through. An out-of-body experience would have felt like a massive relief to me, and I'm pretty sure I'd remember that. I was so grounded in my flesh as all of these amazing things were being done to save me. They weren't pleasant. That night, Nick wanted me to sit at the edge of the bed and raise my feet up. Just try to lift my feet just a little bit. And I didn't want to do it. He was used to me pushing back. Some of it was absolutely me being lazy and stubborn and just not wanting to do it. But some of it was also how breathtakingly painful it was to just sit there, let alone try to lift my feet. And I know it sounds like the easiest thing in the world to do. Just sit there and raise your foot a couple inches. How hard can it be? Well, in that moment, it felt like the hardest thing I'd ever been asked to do. And it made no sense at all. Not that Nick wanted me to lift my foot. That made sense. His job was to protect the very small amount of mobility that I had left and to foster it and build on it until I could move at least something like a normal person again. We had a long, long way to go. And I was actually still in the near free fall down at this point. We just didn't know it, right? There was always so much hope. Everything you do is predicated on the hope that you'll somehow get better. Otherwise, why even bother doing it? So all he wanted me to do was raise my foot. And we'd had standoffs before. Me refusing to do it, refusing to cooperate, just fighting him the whole way. Not all the time, but enough of it. I did that enough of the time. I can't even imagine what he thought of me, but I know exactly what I thought of him. I hated his guts. I hated him in ways that I didn't know I was capable of hating another human being. When my grandfather, who's kind of a colorful guy, when he didn't like someone, he would say that he wouldn't piss in their ear if their brain was on fire. And that was precisely how I felt about Nick. I can remember thinking those exact words to myself. Again, I was in an animal state. I can't remember exactly what led into what happened. I don't know if I was being especially stubborn. I do know that he realized that I didn't understand what was going on. I remember crying and asking lots of questions that he answered. And I can see that moment that he realized it. His face changed. I think he directly asked me if I knew what was happening. I was present in that moment in ways that I hadn't been, because I'd been so sick, and he recognized my clarity. You have to understand what an amazing professional he was. He understood our relationship and what I was going to need out of it. It's every single after school special involving a physiotherapist that you've ever seen. All those corny movies, all of it. Those things are tropes for a reason. I don't even know how to articulate the journey that you go on with someone when they have to help you regain movement of your body. Nick was in a very unique position, because everybody else on my team did things to me. Sure, I consented whenever that was an option. But when the choice is do this or die, it's kind of a false choice, right? So the doctors and nurses basically got to do whatever their plan was, and I was along for the ride. Nick had to get me to do stuff. And with everything else that was being done to me and that was going on, I was very rarely in the mood to do much of anything other than sleep. I have other memories of my time with Nick from right around this period, and I know that because I remember the room, and my timeline is connected to the different rooms that I was in. Um, and I remember lying there looking at Nick as he tried to cajole me into doing something that would hurt like hell, and we both knew that it was going to hurt like hell. But I was actively thinking about what it would be like to claw his eyes out of his head. Yeah. And in another, what I thought was out of character behavior for me, but apparently it isn't. I wasn't trying to hide how I felt about it either. I usually try to avoid hurting people's feelings. But I feel terrible when I do. But with him, I didn't care. I really didn't care. That night, this night, the one that I'm talking about, was just at the beginning, but he already understood what it was going to take. I had to trust him if I was going to let him teach me how to walk again. I think he also understood how much worse things were going to get. This was not his first rodeo. He knew how much harder the work that we would need to do would be if I lived to get the chance to do it. On that night, I was a terrified woman who didn't understand what was going on. He was midway through explaining where I was on the timeline of things that had happened since I'd gotten sick. And I was sitting on the edge of the bed crying, just as much from the pain of having to sit there as I was from the weight of what he was telling me. And he stopped explaining about the different ICU stages and the stays that I was in and the blood transfusions. And he asked me if I needed a hug. Not if I wanted one, but if I needed one. I said yes before I knew what I had done. And almost immediately I realized that I hadn't been touched by someone in a non-medical capacity in weeks. Every time someone touched me, it was for a purpose. Needles, cutting, moving me one way or another, checking my sugars, my blood pressure, flushing my lines, inserting more tubes. I did not want to be touched, but I needed that hug so badly. So I said yes. It fell out of my mouth before I could stop it. And I think that hug saved my life. That connection with another human being when I was so desperately confused and so horribly ill. He saw me and it made me feel like a person again. Things were about to go dark. The hug happened right before the 7 weeks where I have no memories at all. After I came out of that period, the part that's dark and that's just gone, I didn't remember much from the first 5 weeks or so, but I did remember the hug, and I drew on the strength it gave me. I can distinctly remember the moment that I remembered it for the first time after all those weeks that I've lost. I knew then, I knew it had saved my life. And I'm still not completely sure why I'm telling you this. I haven't figured it out. Maybe I'm supposed to tell you so that you'll know, even at your lowest, when you're barely hanging on and you feel like you're more confused than anything else, there's still hope. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep going. Sometimes you have to trust the process and just push forward. I think there's a parallel too between my early bewilderment and the way that I felt before I lost my weight. Not just in the sense that I hadn't really thought I was that big, but in the way I just hadn't seemed to be able to lose the weight. I've never really known if I qualify as a yo-yo dieter or not. And just hang on, Gladys, give me a second. Yes, I do know I gained my weight back. Thank you. And I do agree that perhaps technically gaining it back once may qualify as yo-yoing. I've always thought of yo-yo dieting as like losing weight, gaining it back, losing some of it again, gaining some of it back, losing that, on and on, a bit of back and forth, right? That's not my journey. I started gaining weight around 8. I first started trying to do something about it on my own. I did not have adults telling me to lose weight. My parents never put me on a diet or even on a scale. I wasn't an obese kid. I was overweight. And there weren't a ton of overweight kids in the 80s. But I started trying to lose weight on my own in middle school. I didn't do anything successfully for more than a dozen years. And when I finally did start to lose weight, it was only because I felt like I'd tried everything with no results and I was giving up. Switching to night eating was a last resort, and I got a lot of pushback. People had no problem telling me that they thought I was nuts. I should have started lying, but I thought it was kind of funny the way people would react when they'd notice that I was losing weight and they'd ask how I did it. And I'd say I was eating whatever I wanted, but only at night. Lots of people didn't believe me, like would call me a liar to my face, not believe me. Even more people told me that it wouldn't work, which I thought was really funny since it was working. It hadn't worked when I tried to only eat during the day. So why not try eating at night and not eating during the day? Just flip the coin, right? That's when I want to eat the most anyway. I didn't understand the science behind what I was doing. This was you could just Google whatever you wanted on your phone. There were no smartphones. I was exhausted from trying. I was fed up with nothing working and I just didn't know what to do anymore. So I spent nearly 2.5 years losing 201 pounds. At the time, I thought it was the hardest thing that I'd ever done. I was wrong. The whole almost dying thing was way harder. But it made losing my weight the second time that much easier because my perspective was completely different. I had all my old reasons to get healthy. Sean, our boys, the way I enjoy being able to move more freely and the way I let them close. And I had new reasons. I had you reasons because I've been increasingly obsessed with helping. I laid there at around the halfway mark of my 5-month stay in the hospital, thinking that I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I had to use my second chance to help people, to do something good. So here we are. I've been slowly, but I promise you as fast as I can, crafting resources to help you with your own weight loss. My free guide to getting started for the last time has already helped thousands of you, and I've released 2 books so far this year. There's my weight loss workbook, Disruptor, that you can find on Amazon, and there's my digital cookbook. My program is also available now too. It's a 53-week long, fully immersive experience to change your relationship with food. We're going to link everything for you in the notes. Thank you so much for joining me and bearing with me. Keep trying, keep tracking. Don't be intimidated and don't give up. You totally got this. Thank you for listening to Disrupting Obesity with Charlotte Skanes. If you know it's time to take back control, lose the weight, and keep it off, reach out to me privately with a direct message on Instagram that says ready so you can start disrupting obesity.